Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of We Are What We Read. I'm Kristopher Zgorski, your host and the founder and sole reviewer at the book review blog BOLO Books. And I don't really need to introduce my co-host because everybody knows her and loves her, but Shawn Reilly Simmons. Thank you again for joining me, Shawn.
Thank you again for having me. This has been so fun. I can't even believe we've been doing it as long as we have. It's just a great time, and I just really look forward to it. I'm seeing everyone that comes, and whenever you tell me the new guests, I can't even believe it's just amazing. I'm just glad to be a part of it. Thank you for having me.
Really exciting, and I just want to do a quick virtual toast because this is our 6-month anniversary. There are now 6 We Are What We Read, so I hope that people who haven't watched them all will go back and watch the others after joining this one. So thank you for joining us, everybody. On that note, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Our first guest this evening is Tess Gerritsen. Tess is the internationally best-selling author of 31 novels, including the Rizzolianized crime novels on which the television series is based. Her upcoming novel, which is excellent, is The Spy Coast, the first in a new series. She lives in Maine. Thanks so much for joining us, Tess, and tell us about your book.
Well, thank you. And I'm really excited to talk about this book. Now, you mentioned I'm from Maine, and that is part of the reason why I chose this book and why this book actually was very impactful for me. The book is Trailed by Catherine Miles, and it is a true crime book about a murder that takes place in the Shenandoah National Park. And the reason it has a connection to Maine is that one of the victims went to college here. So it's a book that felt really personal to me because I am surrounded by woods. I'm always hiking. I sometimes hike alone. And this is a story about 2 women hikers, Julianne Williams and Laura Winans, who in 1996 were murdered in Shenandoah National Park. Now, they were experienced hikers, backpackers. They were fit women. They had led numerous women on backpacking trips, and they had their dog with them. Now, granted, it was just a golden retriever, but the 3 of them, the 2 women and the dog, went on a backpacking trip. They were in an area where it was, there were families, there were lots of hikers, lots of through hikers going through there. They went off the trail a little bit, set up camp that night, and they did not realize it, but they had been stalked. And that night, while they were in their tents, they were bound and gagged, and their throats were cut. And their bodies were found later. The dog went wandering off somewhere. And what Catherine Miles, the author, does is she brings all her intense journalistic skills to finding out how this investigation went, because the killer was never found. But she went back to the forensics, went back to the witnesses and interviewed all the law enforcement people and discovered that a lot of mistakes had been made, as often happens. Forensics weren't properly followed up on. The witnesses were not properly investigated. And there were a couple of false suspects that were looked at. And by the end of the story, she has really identified the most likely killer. Now, he has since died, so we were not able to bring him to justice, but he was apparently a serial killer, and he had probably killed somebody in Maine as well. He liked to focus on wilderness and forested areas. Now, what I really found fascinating was that, you know what? The woods is not a safe place for a woman. There are women who are victimized in many national parks. We just don't hear about those very much. And so now when I go hiking, I have to say, when a man passes me, I give him a very long and careful look. It has freaked me out about nature. I always used to think it was the safest place for a woman to be, but it's not the bears and the snakes you worry about, it's people, and it's usually almost always men. So that's the book that I want to push, and I think you'll find it just as fascinating.
Thank you so much for that recommendation. That sounds awesome. And not for the subject of the book, but it sounds like for a murderino like me. I can't wait to read that, and I really am honored that you're here. I've been such a fan for so long that I can't believe I'm in the same Zoom room with you. That's amazing. So nice to meet you, and thanks for being here. And there's a saying for the Murderino podcast, stay out of the forest. They always say that, stay out of the forest, because it's just not a great place for us to be. Thank you again. Our next guest is my friend Gwyn Jordan. Hi, Gwyn. She's the founder of Gold Dust Literary Agency and Gold Dust Editing and Book Reviews. She's an acquiring editor for Entangled Publishing and a book reviewer for Publishers Weekly. Her genres of interest are mystery, thriller, suspense, and romance. And her favorite cocktail is, just kidding. Hi, Gwyn. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's great. So my book of choice today is Hide. I don't know if you guys can see that. I kind of switched it. Hide by Tracy Clark. I met Tracy a couple of years ago, and she's such a great person and with a wonderful sense of humor. And I love mystery, so I chose this as my book. I have been wanting to read it for quite some time. And so Hide focuses on, it's a serial killer novel. So redheaded women are being killed, and it's the first book in Detective Harriet Foster mystery series. And she is, she's lost her son, and her partner was recently murdered. So she has some things that she's dealing with personally, some grief, but she has to be on the job and try to help the public. And so this new partner that she has, she's trying to acclimate to this new relationship, and he's pretty much chauvinistic and kind of undermines her abilities and her skills. So she has a lot that she's dealing with while she's trying to find the serial killer. And so it focuses on the set of twins. It's a boy and a girl, man and a woman, young man and woman, who learned long ago that their father is a serial killer, that he was killing women, and it's affected them in different ways. So of course you'd be traumatized by that if you're anybody. But Amelia, she goes on to live a pretty productive life and delves into her art. But Brody wound up being institutionalized. He couldn't deal with what he saw. He was really traumatized by it. And so now he's released and coming back, and they're trying to grow their relationship, and they're still close. They're twins, but he is struggling still mentally with everything that happened in his childhood. And in a way, Amelia is too. It goes to show how we all deal with stress and trauma in different ways. One person will react this way, but just because someone is not, maybe not taking medication or in an institution, it doesn't mean they're not suffering. And so it helps bring awareness to that, which is very important. It has lots of suspects, and we get to follow along with Detective Foster and her team to solve these murders. And there's some twists and turns and some unexpected events, and I really loved it. Tracy did a great job with fleshing out this, and you think you're seeing one thing and you think something, and then you don't really know what you thought you knew, but then maybe you did, but there's more to it than what you thought. So I really enjoy the story. I recommend it. Like I said, it sheds light on mental health issues, which is really good, but it has that mystery, that you have the clues and you're following along. So I think it's a really great book, and I recommend.
Thanks so much, Gwyn. I too loved Tracy's book, and it will probably be on my top reads of the year list, which I have not compiled yet because we're still have 3 months to go. But it's definitely a great suggestion. So thanks for bringing that to the table.
Oh, thank you.
Next up, we have Jeffrey Marks. Jeffrey Marks is the Edgar, Agatha, and Anthony and McCavity nominated author who has written prolifically about mystery authors of the 1940s and 50s, including Who Was That Lady and Atomic Renaissance. He is currently working on a biography of Earl Stanley Gardner and a dual biography of the two men who wrote as Ellery Queen. In his spare time, he's the publisher at Crippen and Landru. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you. I'm going to be talking about a book that's probably older than most everyone else's here. So when I was a teenager, which I know was a few years ago, I began reading all the mysteries I could get my hands on. I enjoyed all of them, but most of all the Golden Age mysteries. But most of them were serious in their approach to mystery and murder. It wasn't until I ran into Craig Rice that I discovered comedic mysteries. She's been called the Dorothy Parker of detective fiction for a reason. She was the first mystery writer to be featured on the cover of Time magazine back in 1946. So there it is. And her books, and yes, as you can tell from the Time magazine, Craig is a she, and it was an amazing mix of strong characters, great plots, and slapstick fun. I'm recommending her second novel, The Corpse Steps Out, as my favorite book. It's the second book in her John J. Malone, Jake Justice, and Helene Brandt series, though Helene becomes Helene Justice later on in the series. Craig isn't very well known these days, though she should be. Part of the issue is that she's best known for some other books. Home Sweet Homicide, which was made into a movie back in the 1940s, is a cute cozy, but it's not typical of her other works. So most of her readers either pick up her first book, which is 8 Faces at 3, if you like to read your books in order, or Trial by Fury, which is a Haycraft Queen cornerstone mystery. And if you're not familiar with those, you definitely should check them out. They are a great library of Golden Age detection. And while all 3 of the mentioned books are good, I'm going to tell you why The Corpse Steps Out is her best. So in the second book, John J. Malone becomes the main character and the viewpoint character in the book. In her first book, 8 Faces at 3, Jake Justice is the main character. The change to Malone improved the stories. He's a Chicago lawyer who's always short on cash, but has never lost a case. And Malone could easily been named Miss Malaprop because he is always mangling his sayings and idioms along the way. Jake is a down-and-out reporter working as a press agent for radio star Nell Brown. Jake doesn't keep a job long, which is in direct contrast to his future wife. Helene has her own fortune and she doesn't have to work. But there's also another character in this series that isn't talked about much, and that is Chicago. Craig lived in Chicago, and she wrote about it with accuracy and love. In the chase scenes with Helene, the streets are detailed in description. It's not just a matter of knowing where the streets intersect, but Craig knew where the bars were and where the L's ran. In the same way that Chandler and Connolly are known for LA, Craig Rice should be known for her Chicago. And that's why the Haycraft Queen book, Trial by Fury, which is a great book, is probably not her best because it's set on a vacation in Wisconsin. And while Craig had grown up in Wisconsin, it wasn't the love that she has for Chicago. The story starts off with a corpse that appears and then disappears, which is where the title comes from. It's not a spoiler, to tell you that Paul March is discovered dead on the floor. Craig Rice wastes no time in getting the plot started. However, he decides to get up and leave before anyone else sees him, and then he's not reported as dead in the newspaper. The crime scene gets trampled as one character, and then another decides to visit him. Each one has their own reason, or we call a motive, for going there. So the frenetic pace of the story gives Craig time to provide each character with motive, and in some cases an opportunity. And yet she does it with humor, and she kind of pokes at the stories where the clues are hidden in a pristine crime scene. Hers are a mess. And when each of the 3 main characters takes her own path, trying to find out who killed March and where he is now, Craig is able to keep 3 characters active and sleuthing, and it's a juggling act that she does well. They cross paths, they run off to hunt another clue, and yet we get to see where all of them are. The slapstick elements come in, and as the story as Helene leads the police on a car chase through the streets of Chicago. And of course, she escapes with some madcap moves that I would not recommend in your car. The attempts to get married by Jake and Helene provide some more laughs. They want to elope, and you can bet that Craig throws a few more bodies and a few obstacles in their way so that they can't make it to the courthouse on time. In the midst of the humor, the body count does add up. There are 3 deaths in the book, and while the humor keeps coming, the deaths are tied to some fair play, clued plot points. And it's hard to stop laughing and just enjoy the chase, but the reader, if they stopped and thought about it, could figure out who had done it. So in the end, in the midst of quirky characters and madcap plots, you're going to find Craig did a wonderful misdirection that fooled all of us. There's lots of other funny mystery authors who can bring out a laugh or a chuckle, but no one else has the same zany madcap style of Craig Rice.
Wait to read that because I haven't read that one. But my mom had all of the Golden Age books in the house when we were kids, so I'm sure I can just go for it and pick it up and find it. Thank you for the recommendation. Anything Jeffrey recommends, you can just guarantee it's gonna be a great thing. He's one of my favorite people, and you always have good taste, and everything is wonderful. So Cannot wait to read that. Thank you for bringing it to us. Our next guest is Liz Milliron, and I know how to say that because I work with her a lot. Recovering technical writer Liz Milliron is the author of the Laurel Highlands Mysteries, set in the scenic Laurel Highlands, and the Homefront Mysteries, set in Buffalo, New York, during the early days of World War II, of which I have read all of them multiple times. She is a member of Pen Writers, Citrus and Crime, International Thriller Writers, and the Historical Novel Society. Liz splits her time between Pittsburgh and the Laurel Highlands, where she lives with her husband and a very spoiled retired racer greyhound. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Shawn. Now you're making me blush. So Shawn's a great editor to work with. I'm just putting it out there. Thank you so much for Shawn and Kristopher for the invitation to participate in We Are What We Read. I'm fairly honored to be here. I had a fairly difficult time deciding what book to talk about. I read often and widely, so my choices kind of seemed limitless. However, I kept coming back to one title, and finally I thought, maybe that's the book I should talk about. So I chose what I consider a seminal work in the thriller subgenre, and that is The Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth. I'm not alone in this opinion. I had to buy a new copy because I thought I had lost my well-read paperback. And there's a quote from some guy named Lee Child on the cover that says, "A year zero game-changing thriller, one of the most significant of all time." Published in 1973, the plot of The Day of the Jackal is excruciatingly simple. A group of disaffected French nationalists have hired an international assassin, known only as the Jackal, to kill French President Charles de Gaulle. Once French intelligence learns of this plot, they realize they need not a master spy, but a detective, someone used to searching out the unknown. Enter commissaire of the police judiciaire, Claude Lebel. Both men have impossible tasks. For the Jackal, he must craft a plan to get close enough to the most protected man in France, if not the world, not only to kill him, but to escape alive to enjoy his payoff. For Lebel, he must track down the Jackal, knowing only that he exists. He realizes the enormity of his task almost immediately. And I'm going to read a small excerpt. Several times, the need for absolute secrecy, the imperative of the head of state himself, had impressed on him, Lebel. While he listened, his heart sank. They were asking, no, demanding the impossible. He had nothing to go on. There was no crime, yet. There were no clues. There were no witnesses, except 3 whom he could not talk to. Just a name, a code name, and the whole world to search in. What follows is a cat and mouse game par excellence. You travel with both the Jackal and Lebel through a series of moves and counter moves until the very end. I have read this book numerous times, and this time when I reread it, I was still breathless, waiting for that final twist. I was 13 years old when I read Jackal for the first time. I was already a fan of Agatha Christie and Mary Higgins Clark. Then my father put Day of the Jackal in my hands and said, "Try this. I think you'll like it." I was entranced. Jackal was different than anything else I'd read. Agatha Christie is a puzzle to be solved. Who did kill Roger Ackroyd? Even in Mary Higgins Clark, there is an element of the unknown. Where are the children and who took them? But Jackal is different. All the characters are known. All the cards are on the table. You know as much as both sides. And in this way, the book is less of a puzzle to be solved than a chess match to be played. And Forsyth is a grandmaster. Every move is exact, both logical and intuitive. The results are both seen and surprising. Every time you learn something from either Jackal or Lebel, you hold your breath, waiting to see how the other side will respond. The language is concise, stark, and even brutal, depending on the needs of the story. Jackal was the first book I read where I was just as invested in the story of the antagonist as the protagonist. I didn't want the Jackal to succeed, not really, but I found myself wanting him to be clever, capable of leading the authorities on a merry chase. I didn't want him to be cornered by a dumb mistake. I yearned to see how he would respond to the moves the law made, how his ingenuity would allow him to escape over and over and over. And when I reached the end, it was thrilling, satisfying, and surprising all at the same time. If you are a fan of the thriller genre, I urge you to read The Day of the Jackal, whether it is for the first time or the 14th. You will not be disappointed.
Thanks so much, Liz. I think that Frederick Forsyth is one of the great spy writers, so that's really great suggestion. And we are seeing a resurgence of spy novels with the Slow House novels, and then Tess's new series is also about some spies. So that's a great suggestion. Thanks for bringing it to us. Our next guest is Richie Narvaez. Richie Narvaez is the Agatha and Anthony Award-winning author of 4 novels, including Roach Killer and Other Stories, Hipster Death Rattle, Holly Hernandez and the Death of Disco, and most recently, Noir Yurikin. Welcome, Richie.
Well, thank you, Kristopher, and thank you, Shawn, for having me, for inviting me here. This is a great thrill. The book I'm going to talk about is from 1970. It is fairly well known and has achieved some great accolades. Dennis Lehane called it the game-changing crime novel of the last 50 years. And Elmore Leonard went as so far as to declare it the best crime novel ever written. And he said it makes the Maltese Falcon look like Nancy Drew. It's a book I think many people have heard of, but may not have read, which is one of the reasons I am bringing it up. It is The Friends of Eddie Coyle by George V. Higgins. Now, the first time I came across the story for this book was not with the book, but was with the 1973 movie with Robert Mitchum. And I saw the movie as a kid. I was obviously unsupervised. I was watching probably 4:30 movie or $1 Million movie, and they were showing it. And my impression was, gee, this is really chatty. Everybody's just talking. And I didn't quite get what was going on. There's a lovely heist in the movie that was interesting, but I didn't get it. Didn't appreciate it. Years later, in college, I was experimenting, as many of us do, with crime fiction. I had had a very sort of pulpy upbringing, and I was trying different kinds of things. And I saw this book, picked it up, and I started reading it. And I said, oh, hey, there's a lot of dialogue in the first chapter. And the second chapter is also, it's a lot of dialogue. And I think, is the rest of the book like this? And the dialogue was good, but I was like, there's no way he's going to do this for the whole book. How can he get away with that? How can that possibly work? And the thing is, it actually works, and it works very well. What he's able to do is create a plot, setting, set a theme, and create suspense just having these situations where his characters are talking to each other over coffee and bowling alleys at hockey games. So just if you don't know, so this is the basic story is this. It involves Eddie Coyle, aka Eddie Fingers, or the Stocky Man, as he is referred to often in the text. He is a low-level criminal. He's the kind of guy who gets one guy, who gets guns from one guy and gives it to another guy, sort of a middleman. All of his friends, and we learned that idea of the friends of Eddie Coyle is ironic pretty early. All of his friends are also low-level criminals or low-level agents who are desperate to get things done, and they all sort of backstab each other. There's all these lies going on. At the start of the book, Eddie is in the middle of a gun exchange or a gun deal, and we find out that he has recently been pinched for traveling with a truck full of Canadian Club whiskey. He is going to get sentenced. And he's hoping that by talking to an ATF agent, telling him what he overheard, similar, by the way, to what the reader's experiencing, what can we intuit from a conversation? He's intuiting from a conversation he had with the gun guy that perhaps there are some Black Panthers who are buying machine guns. So he tries to sell this information or give it to the ATF guy, so the ATF guy is able to talk to the judge so that his sentencing will be more lenient. It's sort of a desperate pitch by him, but these are all desperate characters. If you, by the way, have a child or niece or nephew who is interested in a life of crime, this is a great book to give them, to discourage them, because they can see how desperate and sweaty and sad the life of crime is. This is a great companion or contrast to Mario Puzo's The Godfather, which came out around the same time, which romanticizes crime. It's really a good double feature to see The Godfather and then the Friends of Eddie Coyle movie to see what they're both saying about crime in America. Anyway, one interesting thing, this book was an instant hit for him. He had written 10 books or so beforehand. This is the first one that got published. Big hit for him. Everybody talked about how good the dialogue was, how good the characterization was, but they often dinged him about plot. And I think they missed what he was trying to do. Years later, in an interview, he said, dialogue is character and character is plot. And this book is a great example of that, the Hemingway iceberg theory, where you just show a little bit, but there are depths and depths underneath. And through the conversations of these characters, all this stuff radiates outward and makes it a wonderful read. Now, for me, in college, this was a tremendous influence. One of my first crime fiction short stories, I tried to do this in direction. And the story was about a hitman, and it was mostly dialogue, but also school records and newspaper accounts. And it kind of worked. And even recently, I wrote a story. It's going to get published in Voltron, and it is all dialogue, or mostly dialogue, because I had recently dipped into the Friends of Eddie Coyle again. I reread the book every couple of years. The first time I read it, actually, when I finished it, I turned around and read it again, and I'd only done that before with Lord of the Rings and 100 Years of Solitude. I haven't done it for any of the book. It's a wonderful book. It continues to influence me, not just mostly because of the language. The use of language is fascinating, but also the way it takes something that crime fiction is often maligned for being so tropey, being formulaic, and it takes the parts of that formula and does amazing things with it using language. So highly recommended. And also, please make sure to watch the Robert Mitchum movie from 1973, probably one of his top 3 performances.
Awesome. And that is one of the books that I'm constantly hearing about, but I need to get on this. I need to get this taken care of and get this read, and I need to watch the movie again, because I think I was also unsupervised watching it back in the day. Probably didn't understand what was happening. Yeah, we're like the latchkey, the Ben expert generation. Nobody was watching anything we were doing. But thank you so much for that. That was amazing. Really, I want to go out and read that. So that was a perfect pitch. And also, I have a nephew maybe that needs to get scared. Thanks, Richie. It's always a pleasure to see you. Hey, anyone?
Great to see you.
Yeah, it's always good to see you. Anyone that's at a crime or any kind of convention, if you get a chance to see Richie on a panel, make sure you get there, because it's always going to be entertaining and fun, and he's just very funny. I always enjoy
Thank you.
listening to you say anything.
Thank you.
Our next guest, Gene Redmann, is the author of a mystery series featuring New Orleans private detective Michelle Mickey Knight. Her latest book in that series is the newly released Transitory. Redmann lives in a historic neighborhood in New Orleans at the edge of the area that flooded. I'm glad that you're okay. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Actually, I do not live in New Orleans anymore. I retired and I have moved out, but New Orleans will always be the city of my heart and soul, which is one of the reasons I picked the book that I did, which is Scorched Grace by Margot Duahi. And I picked this all because it is set in New Orleans, and that always has some affinity to me, but also because it feels like she just is walking a tightrope where she threw together about everything that you possibly could. The book opens with us meeting her character, her first person narrator, sister, yes, as in nun, Sister Holiday Walsh. And Sister Holiday is sitting, has decided to sneak away from the meeting with the other nuns at the convent, and is out smoking a cigarette that she purloined from one of the students. And as she's sitting in the alley, she suddenly realizes that something's going on. She smells smoke, and she suddenly finds out that the school has been burned on fire, and she watches as the flaming body of one of the janitors is thrown out one of the windows. And that sort of sets her off on her journey to figure out what's going on. I'm just going to read the first line because so I get the light here. The devil isn't in the details, Evil thrives in the blind spots, in absence, negative space, like the haze of a sleight of hand trick. The details are God's work. My job is keeping those details in order. And so she's a nun. She's also had a career as a punk rocker, and she recounts the very torrid affair she had with one of her female band members, and what their relationship is still now. And it juxtaposes all these things, like, nuns and lesbians and music and religion, and she walks a very fine line of not being disrespectful to religion, but questioning it in ways that are very interesting. I will state firmly that my religious belief is I don't want to be bullied by dead old men. And so I have walked away from most religions, even though I find some beauty and some grace in a lot of them. But so much of that has been so harmful. But what she does is she looks at how can someone who needs redemption, and once you find out Sister Holiday's backstory, you understand what she's looking for and why she went from being, a kind of a drugged out punk rocker and decided to take vows as a sister of the Sublime Blood, which is the order that she is in. And she also focuses on the New Orleans most people don't really see. She's not in the tourist area. She's in the uptown. And one of the really pervasive things is the heat of the city. And as someone who's lived there for way too many summers, I can definitely attest that she got that. And the story focuses on her deciding she must find her redemption in solving this mystery, and what it drives her to do, and why she does that, and how fire has played into so much of her life, and why she desperately needs this. And so that's what I found interesting is it's a story where you want to read the story because you want to find out who did it, but you also want to find out what all the different levels of it, the way she deals with her brokenness of her character, and the way her character needs to almost go as far from who she used to be able to find out who she is.
Thanks so much, Jean. I completely agree. I do think that we will look back and see Sister Holiday as one of the great characters in crime fiction. I actually have a copy of the second in the series, and I can't wait to dive into that. So thank you for bringing that to us tonight.
Yes, she reminds me of Lisa Cody in Bucket Nut.
Yes, it's just a great novel. So everybody, rush out and get it.
Yes, indeed. She has another one too. Yes, thank you, Kristopher, and thank you.
Our next guest is Barbara Ross. Barbara Ross is the author of 11 Maine clam-baked mysteries, with the 12th coming in April, and 5 Maine clam-baked novellas, with the 6th coming in January. Her books have been nominated for multiple Agatha Awards for Best Contemporary Novel and have won the Maine Literary Award for Crime Fiction. Barbara and her husband live in Portland, Maine. Welcome, Barb.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. The book I'm recommending is Ruth Rendell's Simisola. I'm recommending Rendell, and I will probably say Rendell because that's what it was in my head for 30 years, but I believe she pronounced it Rendell. The reason I'm recommending Rendell is not because she was unappreciated. She won every award available in the mystery world, but because she meant so much to me as a reader. I was a Nancy Drew kid, and I was an Agatha Christie teenager and a Dorothy L. Sayers teenager. And then I was an English major in college, and I spent about 15 years reading American literary fiction and commercial fiction. And it was in the late 80s that I threw a book against the wall and said, if I never read another book where I don't care what happens to anyone in it ever again, I will die. And that brought me back to mystery. And P.D. James and Ruth Rendell were my gateway back into the mystery world. Many people would pick the books Rendell wrote as Barbara Vine to recommend because they're considered more literary, they're darker, but I love series, and I loved the Inspector Wexford books. There are 24 books that were published between 1964 and 2013. Wexford is a kind, decent, happily married man. And at the time that I read this book in the mid-90s, he was an antidote to me for the lone wolf, dysfunctional, alcoholic detectives. He's certainly not without flaws. He favors one of his children, which I always found to be, and he's in agony over it. And I always found that to be such an interesting flaw, because we all say that we love them equally. So I've always found that really interesting. When it came time, though, to pick a book in the series, I really kind of, with 24 books to choose from, you can imagine I had a hard time, but I picked a Simmons because I remembered it so vividly. I read it in the mid-90s and I still remember it vividly. One of the things that's wonderful about such a long series, and she wrote about the same town for 50 years, is that she evolved the town. So it sort of moved from being a market town with a high street and a pub to being really subsumed into suburb. The next book in the series, Road Rage, is about a huge fight over a bypass. And I love the way the town evolved throughout the series. And by 1994, when Simmons-Ola, the 16th book, was published, there are 20 Black families living in Kings Markham, including Inspector Wexford's general practitioner, who comes to him and says that his adult daughter is missing. And that's what kicks off everything that happens in the series. The series Simmons-Ola examines not just overt racism, but what we would call today systemic racism on the Kings Markham police force. Wexford, who is always portrayed as this kind, decent man, labor, not liberal in his politics. Rendell always made that distinction between herself and her character, maintains that no white Briton of his age can be without prejudice, which is an interesting thing to say in 1994. And Rendell does this amazing thing in the book where he makes a mistake based on an assumption based on race, and she tricks you as the reader into making the exact same mistake. And then you go back and you go, oh my gosh, it was right there, but I missed it even as the point of view character missed it. It's really amazing. It also deals with issues of modern slavery, which is still happening today, where people come in this case to the UK on diplomatic or other rich people type visas, and are allowed to bring their servants who arrive without any documentation or work papers, and can be abused or not paid because they're not really people and they have no recourse and nowhere to go. So it's a really interesting book. With all the books, all Rendell's books, the prose, the characters, the plot are always amazing. And I would recommend any of the Wexford books, or the Ruth Rendell standalones, or the Barbara Vine standalones.
Yes, I remember my mom had the whole row also, and I hope I get a lot of these things later. I'll have to go back and find that one for sure. I'm sure it was in my house growing up. But thank you so much for bringing that to us. And it's always good to see you, Barb. It's always great.
It's great to see you.
I always feel like I need to put a sweater on when I see Barb because it's going to be cold and we're going to be in Boston. So thanks for coming. Our next guest, last but not least, is Faye Snowden. And I'm also really honored to be in the same space with her tonight. Faye is the award-winning author of noir mysteries, poems, and short stories. Her latest novel, A Killing Rain, was longlisted for the CWA Gold Dagger Award and won gold in the 2022 Books Forward Indies Award. Her short story, The Obsession of Abel Tangier, will be published alongside many other talented authors in the Best American Mystery and Suspense of 2023, which comes out on October 17th, just around the corner. Thank you so much for being here, Faye.
All right. Thank you so much, Shawn. I'm just fangirling all over the place from this entire panel of authors. So thank you. I'm funny you should mention that. But you know what? The book I chose has been on my to be read pile for a very long time. And I just picked it up maybe like a month and a half, 2 months ago. It came out in 2016 and it's written by an author by the name of Joe Ide. And you spell that last name IDE. And the name of the novel is IQ. And it stars a private eye by the name of Isaiah Quintabe. And he solves crimes in the hood. And the reason he is doing this is because he and his brother were growing up alone in East LA, and his brother had always been his role model. Isaiah had this huge intellect and IQ. He thought he was going to go off to college and be an engineer or something, but then he witnessed his brother killed by a hit and run driver. And so he has to find out a way to make money. And after a small foray in some crime, he decided that solving crimes in the East LA neighborhood would probably be best for him. So the first book, IQ, is the first book in the series. He's just come out with a sixth one. I think it's called Fix It. It's out now. It kind of sets him up solving on a string of cases. The first case he solves is like a girl who is kidnapped off the street right in front of him. And then the second case, one of the other cases he solved is a runaway from a home. And then the other one is a rapper that takes up a bulk of the book, and it's kind of hilarious, but is a rapper who is someone's trying to kill him, and he hires Isaiah to kind of figure out who's trying to kill him. And what I loved about it is that this rapper is having a midlife crisis, which is just so delightful. The reason that I loved this book is because, first, if it's a setting, it's a gang infested, poor neighborhood, stories about people that you seldom hear about in books. And if you did hear about them, it was in one kind of way, very stereotypical, but he kind of busts that wide open. And it resonated with me because these are the types of neighborhoods that I grew up in. And I was able to kind of recognize myself in East LA. The settings there, when I talk about stereotypical, in any other books, you may see the tragedy, the violence, and the poverty. But what Ide does very well is he infuses what I felt growing up. There's also hope. There's also laughter. There's also dreams and this incredible humor. I mean, I can remember sitting on the floor when we didn't have anything to eat. It doesn't sound funny, but I can remember my sisters and I just cracking one joke after the other and laughing our full heads off when other people would say, okay, you have no reason to be laughing right now. So there's a lot of joy and laughter in the book too. The characters I really like the rapper who's going through his midlife crisis, are fully developed, wonderfully complex, and the way I like to write my characters too, they are deeply flawed. I mean, you may spend half of the book thinking, there's no way I like this guy. I would not take so-and-so out for a beer. But by the end of the book, you said, okay, not for a beer, but maybe for a Diet Coke. And then also the characters themselves, they continue to do the unexpected, but because of the way Ide writes the book, that unexpected feels very right. And that's one thing as an author I try to do myself. And the last thing is the plot. The plot, I've written some things down so I wouldn't forget. It's thoroughly entertaining. It's twisty. You're going to go on a wild roller coaster ride, but in the end, I thought it was ultimately satisfying. And I can't wait to dig into the next book, which I believe Righteous. And then kind of when you think about IQ and this series, think about the saying, when everybody thinks you're a nobody, then nobody sees you coming. So that's how the whole book ran. But I just loved it. I can't believe I discovered this author so late. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Faye. I think I also enjoyed the book, and I think that it's important to note that Isaiah is very much in the tradition of Sherlock Holmes. I mean, the way he's solving crimes is very much how Sherlock Holmes solved his crimes. So that's a good through line of the crime fiction. So thank you for bringing that to us. That's our guests for tonight. We've talked about some old books now. Shawn and I always like to end an episode with us telling you what we're looking forward to coming up. So my choice for this month is The Blue Monsoon by Damayanti Biswas. Her first book, The Blue Bar, or not her first book, but the first book in this series, The Blue Bar, was a Mumbai set noir tale of a serial killer that's unlike any other serial killer novel you've ever read. Highly recommend it. I have not read The Blue Monsoon yet. It comes out on October 24th. I'm running a little behind on my reading, but it is a story that seems to be that it's going to be about a crime at a temple, and there is a Bollywood social media influencer involved. So that sounds very exciting. What I loved about Damayanti's book was that it really made me feel like I knew what Mumbai was like, and having never been there, I felt very transported. So I'm hoping that I feel that again with the new novel, and that's the one I am looking forward to. Shawn, what are you looking forward to?
Well, first off, for you, Kristopher's the only person that's behind for a book that's coming out in a month from now. I want to talk to you about being behind. Let me tell you what feels like behind you. I'm just teasing you. You're always ahead and always on top of things and always telling me what I should be reading. So I am really looking forward to The Leftover Woman by Jean Kwok. I have not read it yet, but I don't have early access to things, but I'm looking forward to it. It's coming out for in October. The plot circles around the one-child policy in China. I'll just read you real quick the first part of it. Jasmine Yang arrives in New York City from her rural Chinese village without money or family support, fleeing a controlling husband on a desperate search for the daughter who was taken from her at birth, another female casualty of China's controversial one-child policy. But with her husband on her tail, the clock is ticking, and she's forced to make increasingly risky decisions if she ever hopes to be reunited with her daughter again. I've always been fascinated by that policy, just the idea of being controlled to that level in your own family life. And it's not just women, it's men over there too, but I can kind of relate to it. Being a woman, it's hard being a human. It's really hard to be a woman, especially when everyone has an opinion about how and where and how often you should have children. I think it resonates with me. I like that kind of idea. I like that. I want to dive into this and find out more about the story and this fictional character who I'm sure will inform me about other people going through similar things in that culture and our culture. So I'm looking forward very much to that.
Thank you, Shawn. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. Just a heads up that our next episode will be an all UK edition. So those of you who love UK writers, please make sure you join us for that one. And until then, read often and read widely. Thanks so much.